There is a particular kind of quiet that does not come from silence. It is the quiet of a person still moving through their days, still answering messages, still showing up, still meeting expectations. But inside, something has stopped speaking. You are not depressed. You are not broken. You are not even unhappy. Exactly. But you have begun to notice a strange thing. The reasons you once got out of bed no longer feel like reasons. They feel like routines, like furniture you've had for so long you no longer see it, only bump into it. And this is the moment when the thought of quitting first appears, not as a scream, but as a whisper, not as despair, but as logic. You think, maybe I've done enough. Maybe this is just who I am now. Maybe it's time to stop expecting more. But here is what Carl Jung observed across decades of working with the human soul. What feels like exhaustion is often initiation. What feels like failure is often the end of a chapter you were never meant to stay in. And what feels like a wall is often a doorway you have not yet learned to see. This video is not here to tell you to try harder. It is here to help you recognize something most people never recognize in time. The moment you most want to turn back is almost never the moment you should. Part 1. The kind of tiredness rest does not cure. You have probably experienced this. You sleep 8 hours. You eat reasonably well. You are not under any obvious crisis. From the outside, your life appears functional, even stable. And yet you wake up already feeling as though you have been running. Not the sharp exhaustion of illness, or the clean fatigue of physical labor. Something else. Something gray. A tiredness that lives not in your muscles but in the space behind your eyes. A tiredness that remains even after 3 days of doing nothing. If you have tried to explain this to someone, you know how impossible it is. You sound ungrateful. You sound lazy. You sound like you are making it up. But you are not making it up. What you are experiencing is not a depletion of energy. It is a withdrawal of energy. And those are two completely different things. Depletion happens when you spend more than you have. You rest, you replenish, you return. Withdrawal happens when your internal system detects that the energy it is producing is no longer being used in alignment with something essential. It does not collapse. It simply stops making the energy as easily accessible. Not because it cannot, because it will not. Think of a river that has been diverted to power a machine for years. The machine runs. The work gets done. But one day, the river begins to slow. Not because there is less water, because the water has sensed that the machine is no longer serving the land it came from. It still turns the gears, but it no longer wants to. You are that river, and the exhaustion you feel is not a symptom of weakness. It is a symptom of loyalty. Your system is still doing what it promised to do. But it has stopped believing in the reason. Carl Jung wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." This is the exhaustion that rest cannot cure, because it is not asking for rest. It is asking for meaning. When you treat this exhaustion as a scheduling problem, you solve it with better habits, stricter discipline, more efficient routines, and none of it works. Not because you are doing it wrong, but because you are answering a question of meaning with a solution of mechanics. You are trying to fix a crisis of orientation with better navigation. But the map is not the problem. The destination is. So here is the question you have likely been avoiding. Not because you are afraid of the answer, but because you are afraid of what happens if you admit the question exists at all. What if the life you have built is not wrong, but has simply finished teaching you what it came to teach? Part 2. When the container no longer fits. There is a pattern in nature that is rarely discussed. A tree does not die when it stops growing taller. It dies when its root system can no longer support the width of its own branches. But before it dies, there is a long period where it simply stops. It produces fewer leaves. It sheds what it cannot sustain. It does not look sick. It looks still. People mistake this stillness for decline. They assume the tree is dying. But in some species, this stillness is not decline at all. It is the tree reallocating resources from vertical growth to structural reinforcement. It is not ending. It is deepening. You are not declining. You are deepening. But deepening does not look like progress. It does not look like achievement. It looks like standing in place while the world moves past you. It looks like being left behind. And because our culture has no ceremony for this stage, no ritual, no recognition, you have only one framework to interpret it. I am failing. You are not failing. You are outgrowing a container that once held you safely and now holds you too tightly. The container might be a career you chose 20 years ago when you were a different person. It might be a relationship that once felt like liberation and now feels like maintenance. It might be an identity. I am the reliable one. I am the high achiever. I am the person who never quits, that you built to survive a world that demanded you be useful. And now that identity has become a cage. The container is not bad. It was not a mistake. It saved you. It gave you shape when you had none. It taught you how to stand. But containers are not meant to be permanent. They are meant to hold you long enough for you to grow into what comes next. And when you have outgrown them, they do not become evil. They become small. Jung observed this with remarkable precision. He noted that many of the people who came to him in middle life were not suffering from trauma or pathology. They were suffering from the completion of their first life. They had built a functioning identity. They had achieved what they set out to achieve. And now, with the goal accomplished, they felt not satisfaction but emptiness, not arrival but disorientation. Jung called this the task of the second half of life, not to accumulate more, not to achieve more, but to integrate what the first half excluded. The first half of life is about building a self that works. The second half is about dismantling that self enough to discover who you actually are. This is why the exhaustion you feel is not a problem to be solved. It is a signal to be interpreted. And the signal is this: you have reached the end of a version of yourself that was never meant to be the final version. Part 3. The space between no longer and not yet. There is a Tibetan Buddhist teaching about the moment between exhale and inhale. Most people rush through it. They exhale, and immediately they reach for the next breath. They cannot tolerate even a second of emptiness. They fill it instantly with the next inhalation. But the teaching says, everything that matters happens in that gap. Not in the breath you take, but in the pause between breaths. That pause is not absence. It is presence without grasping. It is awareness without agenda. You are living in that pause right now. You have exhaled the old breath. You have not yet inhaled the new one. And everything in you is screaming to fill the gap, with a decision, with a plan, with anything that will make you feel less suspended. But the gap is not a mistake. The gap is the point. In developmental psychology, this stage has many names. Liminality, the threshold, the wilderness period. It is the phase in rites of passage when the initiate is no longer who they were, and not yet who they will become. They are stripped of their old name, their old clothes, their old role. They are given no new instructions. They are simply held in the space between. This is not a design flaw. This is the design itself. Because the old self cannot simply be replaced. It must be grieved. It must be thanked. It must be allowed to complete its cycle. And that takes time. Not chronological time, but psychological time. Time that cannot be rushed, optimized, or outsourced. This is why every attempt to fix your situation by immediately choosing a new direction will fail. Not because the new direction is wrong, but because you are trying to skip the grief. You are trying to jump from the death of oneself to the birth of another without passing through the funeral. and the psyche will not allow it. It will drag you back. It will make every new path feel hollow. It will refuse to invest energy in a future that has not yet honored the past. What are you pretending you do not need to mourn? Not a person, not a loss in the conventional sense, but a version of yourself, a set of hopes that once felt alive, a story you believed about how your life would go. You carried that story for years. It kept you warm. It gave you direction. And now it is over, and you have not yet held a funeral for it. This is not weakness. This is depth. The people who move through these transitions most gracefully are not the ones who suffer the least. They are the ones who learn to recognize the threshold for what it is. Not an obstacle, not a punishment. A sacred interval in which the new self is not built, it is incubated. Jung wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. You cannot see the order yet. You cannot see the shape of what is forming. But that does not mean it is not forming. It means you are still in the darkness of the womb, not the light of the birth room. And the only requirement of the womb is patience." Part 4. Why the door opens slowly. There is a phenomenon in high-altitude mountaineering called the death zone. Above a certain elevation, the human body begins to die. Not dramatically, not all at once, but cell by cell. The air is too thin. The pressure is too low. Every step costs more than the step before. And the only way out is through. But here is what experienced climbers know. The decision to turn back is almost never made in the death zone. It is made hours earlier, at the last camp, when the climber is still warm and safe, and the summit is still a possibility. They do not turn back because they have failed. They turn back because they have calculated the cost of continuing and decided they are unwilling to pay it. You are at the last camp. The summit is not visible. The path ahead is uncertain, but you are warm. You are safe. And the thought of turning back is not a scream. It is a spreadsheet. It is reasonable. It is rational. It is the smart choice. And that is exactly why it is dangerous. Because when the decision to quit becomes reasonable, it no longer feels like quitting. It feels like wisdom. It feels like self-care. It feels like finally being honest with yourself about your limitations. But here is what the spreadsheet cannot calculate. The cost of turning back is not the same as the cost of staying. The cost of staying is measurable. More exhaustion, more uncertainty, more time in the space between. The cost of turning back is invisible. It is carried not in your bank account or your calendar, but in your nervous system. It is the quiet contraction that happens every time you remember the door you chose not to walk through. It is the subtle dimming of your own trust in yourself. It is the belief, reinforced with every retreat, that when things become real, you will not follow through. This is not a moral argument. It is not about grit or perseverance or proving anything to anyone. It is about something much simpler. Do you want to live with the weight of the door you closed, or the weight of the path you walked? Neither weight is zero. Both will cost you. But one cost depletes you. The other cost deepens you. In Jungian psychology, this is the moment when the ego confronts the self. The ego wants safety, predictability, the familiar suffering it knows how to manage. The self wants wholeness, integration, the unfolding of what you actually are, not what you have trained yourself to be. The ego does not lose this battle quietly. It fights. It persuades. It makes lists of all the reasons retreat is the mature choice. And the self does not argue. It simply waits. It knows that the door does not stay open forever. It knows that every reasonable retreat makes the next retreat more reasonable. It knows that the person who walks away from the threshold today will find it harder to approach the next threshold tomorrow. What if the hesitation you are feeling is not a warning sign, but a birth canal? And what if the pressure you are experiencing is not crushing you, but pushing you through the only passage wide enough to deliver you into the life that has been waiting? Part 5. What you are actually afraid of. You believe you are afraid of failure. But that is not true. You have failed before. You survived. You learned. Failure is familiar territory. You know how to navigate it. What you are actually afraid of is not failure. You are afraid of becoming who you would be if you succeeded. Because if you succeed, if you actually move through this threshold and emerge on the other side, you will no longer be the person who struggled. You will no longer be the person who tried but couldn't quite get there. You will no longer have the excuse of the unfinished project, the unrealized potential, the almost but not quite. You will have no one to blame, no story to tell yourself about why you haven't arrived. No comfortable identity as the underdog, the late bloomer, the one with so much promise still waiting to be fulfilled. You will simply be the person who did it. And then you will have to face the question, now what? This is the fear that hides beneath all the reasonable objections. Not the fear of falling, the fear of landing, not the fear of the climb, the fear of what you will see from the summit, not the fear of the door, the fear of the room on the other side, furnished with expectations you have never had to meet before. Jung understood this terror intimately. He wrote, "Nothing has a more disturbing effect psychologically than the sudden confrontation with one's own shadow. The shadow is not your darkness. The shadow is what you have refused to become, the qualities you have exiled, the capacities you have disowned, because they did not fit the story you were telling about who you are. And sometimes, what you have exiled is not your weakness. Sometimes, what you have exiled is your power. You have spent years learning to be humble, to be reasonable, to not take up too much space. You have trained yourself to want only what is achievable, to dream only what is practical, to hope only what is safe. And now you are standing at a threshold that requires you to want more than is reasonable, to take up more space than is polite, to believe in something that cannot yet be proven. This is not arrogance. This is integrity. The arrogance was pretending you were smaller than you are. What would you attempt if you were not terrified of becoming the person who actually attempts it? Not succeeds. Attempts. Because success is not the goal. The goal is to stop betraying yourself in advance, to stop negotiating your life down to what is safe rather than what is true. The door is not asking you to guarantee the outcome. It is asking you to walk through it anyway. Part 6. The loyalty you owe yourself. There is a line in the Old Testament that is almost never quoted in self-help literature. When the Israelites are wandering in the desert, complaining that they were better off as slaves in Egypt than free in the wilderness, God does not respond with encouragement. He does not remind them of the promised land. He does not give them a vision board. He says, essentially, "You have been complaining against me long enough. If you want to go back to Egypt, go back. The door is open, but know that you will be returning to the house of your own bondage, and I will not follow you there." This is not cruelty. This is clarity. The wilderness is not a punishment. Egypt is not a reward. The wilderness is the only path to a life that is actually yours. Egypt is the life that was built for you by people who needed you to be useful to them. And the reason you cannot decide which direction to walk is not that you lack information. It is that you are still hoping someone will make the decision for you. Still hoping that circumstances will force your hand. Still hoping that the pain of staying will become so unbearable that you will have no choice but to leave. But that is not how adulthood works. And it is not how thresholds work. At a certain point, the choice is yours, no one else's. And no one else will suffer the consequences of it. If you stay, you will not be betrayed by anyone except yourself. You will not be able to blame your boss, your partner, your parents, the economy. You will be choosing, every morning, to remain in a life that has stopped nourishing you. And you will know that you are the one making that choice. If you leave, you will not be guaranteed anything except the knowledge that you chose. No promised land, no milk and honey, just the open desert in your own 2 feet, and the terrifying freedom of no longer being a victim of your own life. This is the loyalty you owe yourself, not loyalty to a plan, not loyalty to an identity, not loyalty to a promise you made 20 years ago when you had no idea who you would become. Loyalty to the truth of your own becoming, even when that truth is inconvenient, even when it costs you relationships, even when it means admitting that the path you have walked for so long was preparation, not destination. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This sentence is usually read as inspiration. It is not. It is a warning, because becoming who you truly are is not a reward. It is a responsibility. It requires you to stop outsourcing your life to other people's expectations. It requires you to disappoint the people who are comfortable with the old, smaller version of you. It requires you to tolerate the anxiety of not yet knowing who you are becoming. And it requires you to recognize, in the moment when turning back is most reasonable, that the cost of retreat is not safety. It is the slow erosion of your own integrity. What if the only person you are still waiting for permission from is you? And what if the permission you are waiting for will never arrive, because it was never someone else's to give? Part 7. The quiet persistence of things that are alive. There is a phenomenon in forest ecology that has no satisfying explanation. When a mature tree falls in an old-growth forest, it does not become waste. It becomes a nurse log. For decades, it lies on the forest floor, slowly decomposing. And in that decomposition, it creates the conditions for new life. Moss grows on its bark, fungi digest its wood. Seedlings take root in its rotting flesh. The tree does not survive. But it does not disappear either. It is transformed into the soil that will hold the next generation of trees. You have been taught that growth is linear, that progress means leaving things behind, that the goal is to become independent, self-sufficient, unburdened by the past. But the forest teaches something else. The forest teaches that nothing truly alive is ever fully independent. That growth is not escape from the past, but integration of it. That what you carry with you is not dead weight. It is the compost from which your next self will grow. This is why you cannot simply discard the life you have built. Not because it is sacred, not because you owe it anything, but because it is not separate from you. The identity you are outgrowing is not your enemy. It is the nurse log. It held you while you were too small to stand alone. It protected you from winds you were not yet strong enough to withstand. It gave you what it had to give, and now it is time to stop asking it to hold you. It is time to let it become the ground beneath you instead of the structure around you. This is the transformation that cannot be rushed. Not because it is difficult, because it is organic. You cannot force a seedling to grow faster by pulling on its stem. You cannot accelerate decomposition by demanding the log rot on your schedule. You can only create the conditions. You can only stay present. You can only stop fighting the process and start cooperating with it. What if the exhaustion you are feeling is not the end of your vitality, but the redistribution of it? What if your energy is not disappearing, but being reabsorbed into the deeper layers of your life, preparing the soil for something that does not yet have leaves? What if the emptiness you feel is not an absence, but a clearing? Part 8. The threshold does not ask permission. There is a final truth about thresholds that is almost never spoken. The threshold does not ask if you are ready. It does not check your credentials. It does not require that you have resolved all your doubts, healed all your wounds, or achieved perfect clarity about your direction. The threshold simply opens, and you either step through or you do not. You have been waiting for certainty. You have been waiting for the fear to disappear. You have been waiting for a sign so unambiguous that you could not possibly misinterpret it. But that is not how thresholds work. And that is not how human development works. The fear does not disappear. The doubts do not resolve. The certainty never arrives. What arrives is the moment when staying on this side of the door becomes more intolerable than the fear of what is on the other side. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. The fear is not your enemy. It is your escort. It is the guardian of the threshold, and its job is not to keep you out but to ensure that you do not enter casually. The fear ensures that only those who truly need to cross will cross. It filters out the merely curious. It tests the depth of your commitment. And you have passed the test. You are still here, still reading, still listening, still standing at the door, not because you are trapped, but because you have not yet allowed yourself to believe that you are permitted to enter. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness you have been avoiding is not the unknown future. It is the unrecognized truth of your own longing. It is the desire you have been too afraid to name. It is the life you have been too responsible to choose. And the only way to make that darkness conscious is to stop running from it, not toward it either. Not with determination or resolution or clenched teeth willpower. Simply toward. With curiosity. With humility. With the willingness to be changed by what you find there. Conclusion. The door is still open. You have been waiting for a sign. Here it is. The door is still open. Not because you have earned it. Not because you are ready. Not because you have finally resolved every doubt, and healed every wound, and silenced every fear. The door is still open because it was never closed. The only thing that has ever kept you on this side is your own belief that you are not permitted to cross. You are permitted. Not because anyone has given you permission. Not because you have met some invisible standard of readiness, but because the life on the other side of this threshold is already yours. It has been waiting for you longer than you have been waiting for it. It does not require you to be perfect. It does not require you to be certain. It only requires you to show up. And showing up does not mean having a 5-year plan. It does not mean knowing exactly how it will all unfold. It does not mean never looking back or never feeling afraid. Showing up means standing at the door with your hand on the frame, and your eyes open and your breath steady, and saying, "I am here. I do not know what comes next, but I am no longer willing to live on the wrong side of my own becoming." That is enough. That has always been enough. The threshold does not ask for more. It asks for presence. It asks for honesty. It asks for the willingness to be changed by what you find on the other side. You have been carrying this exhaustion for a long time. You have been standing in this in-between space for longer than you expected. You have been waiting for clarity, for courage, for the fear to finally release its grip. But the clarity is not coming. The courage is not coming. The fear is not releasing. Because these are not prerequisites. They are consequences. You do not find clarity and then step through. You step through and the clarity finds you. Not all at once, but gradually, like light filling a room as the door opens. You do not become courageous and then act. You act, and the courage reveals itself, not as the absence of fear, but as the willingness to feel fear and move anyway. And the fear does not release its grip. You release its grip, not by fighting it, by recognizing that the fear is not a jailer. It is a messenger. It has been telling you, all this time, that something important is at stake. It was right. Something important is at stake. Your life. Not the life you have been maintaining, the life you have been avoiding. The door is still open. It has always been open, and no one is going to close it except you. If this video has given you even a moment of recognition, even a single sentence that felt like it was written for the version of you standing at your own threshold, that recognition is not accidental. It is evidence that something in you is already preparing to move. Not because I have told you anything you did not already know, but because you have been waiting for permission to know it consciously. And permission, now, is simply a choice. Subscribe if you are willing to continue walking this path. Not toward easy answers, not toward quick fixes, but toward a more honest relationship with the life that is trying, quietly and persistently, to live through you. The door is still open. See you on the other side.